Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Crypt13 and in today's video I'm going to be doing a DPS comparison between Arataki Itto, Xiao, and Noelle. The approach that I'm going to take today is I am first going to take a look at the math. We're going to see what their damage output is for one single rotation of their elemental burst, and then we're going to jump into the game to see how they really perform. Because even though we're doing the math and we are getting some numbers, we are only taking a look at single target damage and damage just for one single full rotation. There are many other subtle things and mechanics that can make a huge impact on our damage. For example, things like positioning, knockback, energy, and our AoE damage just not hitting as many enemies as we can. So although math does give us a general idea on how each character should perform relative to one another, let's see how things shape up when we actually take them for a spin. Now before we actually start, there are a ton of disclaimers that need to be said. In these calculations, I did not take full advantage of every single buff that could be used on the team. For example, with Xiao, I did not include Thrilling Tales or Bennett buffs, but in the video, I will be using them in the DPS comparisons. The in-game damage comparisons are also done to the best of my ability, as I'm sure that with a better player or better strategies, these showcases can be done faster or even better. Artifacts between Xiao and Itto are also not exactly the same, unlike how I can do it with math calculations. However, do know that the artifacts between Itto and Noelle will be exactly the same, as I am just going to swap them with one another. Xiao's substat distribution is going to be a little bit different. My Xiao is also not ascended to the 6th phase, unlike my Itto and Noelle, and also my Xiao is only 878 talents, whereas my Itto is 989, as well as my C6 Noelle. The teams and the builds that I'm using for these characters are as follows. For the Xiao team, I'm using Zhongli, Bennett, Sucrose with the Thrilling Tales, Animal Resonance, and a Staff of Homa. Although since I'm using Bennett, the less than 50% HP buff from Staff of Homa doesn't always apply. Noelle and Itto, I'm using Zhongli, Goro, Geo Resonance, and the Red Horned Stone Thresher. We're going to go through a lot of different matchups here, many single target matchups and a couple of AoE matchups. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the math really quickly for all of these characters. First off, this first number is a crowned C6 Noelle with Goro and Zhongli buffs. The number on the bottom is if we reduce her talent level down to level 9, which at C6 is level 12, and when she's crowned is level 13. For Arataki Itto, this first number up here is level 8 Itto with Goro and Zhongli buffs, and the number down here is a level 9 Itto. Between a level 13 Noelle and a level 8 Noelle, the percentage difference that I calculated was about 3.3%, and if I lower it down to level 9 talent, or at C6 level 12, it was about 6.6. Now if I increase Itto to level 9, which is what I have for the demonstrations, the difference is now 14.2 and 17.5. However, in the demonstrations, my Ushi is still only level 8 instead of level 9. All of this is also the average damage that these characters deal, because if we just did crit damage, that wouldn't fully reflect itself in the game because crit rate is not 100%. For Xiao here, we have level 8 talent level and various different amounts of combos. So for the first one, it's 8 plunges while doing the typical jet combo, which is one normal attack into a charge attack into a plunge attack. And if you are frame perfect, you can get 8 plunges, but for the average player, you'll probably only get about 7 plunges with the jet combo. The last number here is if Xiao just spams his plunging attacks, and he's able to get 12 during an entire burst rotation. Xiao also has Zhongli and Staff of Homa buff. However, in the demonstrations, we're going to bump him up a little bit with Sucrose and Bennett buffs. So Itto should come out on top in most situations, Noelle a little bit afterwards, and then Xiao. However, since Xiao gets some buffs, maybe he will overtake either Itto or Noelle. So alright, let's go ahead and jump into the game and see how they actually perform. So all timers will begin as soon as each character presses their elemental burst button. So this will not include any of the time that is required for any of the other characters to pop their skills before the main character's burst actually begins. So please keep that in mind when going through these comparisons. Against the poor little Cryo Regisvine, he doesn't really stand a chance against any of these characters. He dies pretty dang quickly, way before any of these elemental bursts are even over. Xiao completely decimates this Cryo Regisvine in his single target DPS using his typical jet combo. Although on my very first plunge attack, I did not get the initial plunge hit. All I got was the AoE damage. So for Xiao, maybe I could have gotten a slightly better time if I actually got that initial plunge damage. Arataki Itto just has so much DPS coming out at the beginning of his elemental burst, and it ends up being the fastest time clear out of all of these characters. Noelle comes in last here because her normal attacks are pretty slow compared to the rest of these other characters. However, with Noelle, I could have gone a little bit tricky here if I had perhaps maybe timed my shield to explode at the perfect moment. I also could have tried to go for some dragon strikes here, but I opted not to go for that kind of playstyle. I also got pretty unlucky with crits here. For this run, I did have some food buffs on Xiao and Itto, so that does make a big difference. But to be honest, being the slowest in killing the Cryo Regisvine isn't anything to cry over. We were only able to hit 3 plunges with the Bennett buff. Our first plunge didn't hit for that much damage, only about 20k. This is probably because we got the low plunge damage to trigger instead of the high one. Our second unfortunately doesn't even crit, but our third is a pretty juicy 53k, and our fourth hits about 42k as we begin to lose buffs, most likely the Thrilling Tales buff and possibly the Noblesse. After all of the buffs are gone and it's just the Zhongli shield, we begin hitting 28k plunges, which is not super strong compared to our Itto and Noelle. It's also somewhat slow, needing to jump and then plunge back down. The Primal Vishap is left with a little bit less than 50% HP. We could probably attribute this to bad RNG on our crits, but it's pretty realistic to say that once our really strong buffs go away, the Bennett and the Sucrose buffs, Xiao's raw plunge damage takes a massive hit. So since our buffs don't line up too well with our elemental burst duration, it makes the overall fight take a lot longer. To close out the fight, we needed a second rotation, and so I decided not to battery up Bennett's ult, although one E-skill could have filled it up. Using Bennett's burst actually made the fight a little bit longer by a couple of seconds here. The extra damage bonus wasn't enough to cut down the time here, so opting to just go straight into Sucrose and Xiao allowed me to get my fastest time here. And lastly, the Jet combo maybe wasn't the best choice because of the wonky hitbox of the Vishap. We didn't get any initial plunge damage hits. For Itto, maybe we got lucky here, or perhaps an extra 8% crit rate makes that big of a difference. But in our run here, every single charge attack resulted in a crit damage as well as every single Ushi. Itto might be hitting lower damage numbers, but they're so fast and there's so many of them that the DPS is out damaging Xiao's run. After one rotation, the Vishap maybe has about 15 to 20% HP left. And instead of charging Goro's elemental burst and putting Zhongli's shield back up again, it was faster to just go straight back into Itto's burst and finish off the fight. However, if I had waited just half a second here for Ushi to come back up before going into my charge attacks, I might have been able to save a second. This was a pretty good run with Noelle. We hit a majority of our crits, and our shield pop also hit its crit mark. After one rotation, we actually did more damage than Itto in his run. There's about 12 to 15% HP left on the Vishap. However, the problem here that made us take longer was that Noelle did not have a burst available immediately after hers ended, which highlights that against these single target enemies who don't drop elemental particles and orbs, you need a proper team to battery Noelle's ult and make sure that your rotations are on point to funnel her burst.
Leave it all to me. I'll catch up.
Who wants some of this? Evil conquering. Worthless. Worthless.
In this domain, unfortunately his AoE wasn't enough to hit every single enemy here. I tried to group up the enemies a bit here with Sucos' burst even. There were a couple of rogue slimes here and there that really hurt our time. When the 3 Minotaurs appeared, we were really close to finishing them off before our burst ran out. However, it was just barely enough damage, especially since all of our buffs were beginning to run out. So here I opted to go directly into his burst without any buffs to finish them off and to not waste those precious seconds switching into every character again and reapplying those buffs. We got a bit unlucky with the positioning of the one Minotaur off to the side, making our AoE miss its target against the last Minotaur. Itto's AoE is actually surprisingly large, coupled with the fact that we can move and adjust its positioning while doing his attacks, unlike Xiao, where you're rooted in place and you have to dash to another place before committing to another plunge attack, which takes precious amounts of seconds. We clear out the first wave pretty quickly and almost take out the triple Minotaurs with one rotation. I'm sure it's possible, but I couldn't get it. For the second rotation, I opted not to use supports and went straight back into his burst. All of the enemies dying dropped particles and orbs, which allowed us to pop that burst basically off of cooldown. Omitting the supports for the second rotation allowed for me to get my fastest clear. Noelle actually has the fastest clear out of the 3. Her large swings make quick work of all of the enemies, but also perhaps my positioning was better in this run, allowing me to take down all 3 Minotaurs before my burst ended. But even if my burst ended, I had another one up anyway without the need for another Geo battery. So in these large multi-mob matchups, Noelle is just simply amazing.
Charge! Everyone on me! Rally! Solidify! Fix! Coming through! Lament! Worthless! Let's roll! Solidify! Disappear! Worthless! Here!
Xiao was pretty quick in clearing out the small doggos and the Minotaur, but his biggest hurdle was the one singular big Rift Hound. One burst rotation wasn't enough to clear everything out, so for the second rotation, I used Zhongli's shield, but not Bennett's buff. Admittedly, I probably should have used it. However, against a single Rift Hound, Xiao's plunge attacks knock him back out of range after 2-ish plunges, and so then we have to chase after him. The jet combo also wasn't particularly effective here because we weren't hitting those initial plunges. I guess maybe the hitboxes on these Rift Hounds are just really weird. Itto cleans up the small mobs pretty quickly, and being able to move during his charge attacks, I'm able to quickly reposition against the big Rift Hound when he appears. We can't finish him off with one rotation, but the energy here is enough to cast Itto's burst off of cooldown. However, I did have 3 seconds left before I could pop it again, so I opted to go into Goro and get a little bit of extra defense with his E skill, and then I went back in immediately with Itto instead of reapplying Zhongli's shield. I ended up clearing this domain half of a second faster than Itto with Noelle. Noelle's charge attacks being the MVP here, I'm able to clear out this configuration of enemies really quickly. We get a really nice boost to our burst duration, so there's no need to waste any time switching and reapplying buffs. We could have reapplied Zhongli's shield, but the doggo was so close to dead already that it wasn't worth the time. I also made sure to time my shield to hit the big doggo because his HP pool is the largest out of all of these enemies. Alright, now some concluding thoughts. It might have looked like Xiao was incredibly underperforming, but do keep in mind that his artifacts weren't as good, as well as his talents being only 878 versus my Itto's 989 and Noelle's 9 on her normal attack talent and 12 on her burst. Xiao's damage is not low in my opinion. I think that he is just more crippled by his playstyle and the mechanics of the enemies. Plunging attacks often make the AI go dumb and do really stupid attacks that make a difference in your clear times. However, it can sometimes benefit benefit you if you know how to control it. It's a double-edged sword. If you want to learn how to master it, it'll take you far, but if it's not worth your effort, your Xiao will be less effective. His plunging attacks also knock enemies back, which sometimes require you to chase them down, which eats up precious time and can change the effectiveness of your AoEs. Also, a lot of useful buffs don't last the entire duration of Xiao's elemental burst, so you need to make sure your first few plunges hit their mark. However, Xiao is missing things that Noelle and Itto both have, that being a dedicated weapon that synergizes perfectly with his playstyle. The Jade Spear is not really the best in slot for him, and the Homa somewhat conflicts if you use Bennett. Xiao also doesn't have a dedicated artifact set or a specific 4-star character that's built to support him directly. All of these buffs will make Xiao into a stronger character, and that's not to say that he's bad right now. He's a solid unit, but has his fair share of problems. Now, between Noelle and Itto, Noelle held up really closely to him, although Noelle has pretty much hit her peak here. She can be crowned on her burst and her normal attacks still, but Itto has a bunch of constellations that will still boost his talents to even more levels. Those, however, are 5-star constellations though, so we know how expensive that is. But a C6 4-star character being able to keep up with the C0 5-star character is pretty damn cool. Congrats, Noelle, you're definitely one of the biggest winners with the new toys we got with the new 2.3 update. So that's pretty much all I have for you guys in this video today. If you made it this far into the video, then you are an absolutely legendary person, and if you enjoyed this type of content, maybe that's worth a like or maybe even a subscribe to the channel. I got a lot of other Genshin content, so make sure to go and check those out if you're new around here. Anyway, until next time, I will see you guys later.